completely non-racial society. We don't believe, for instance, in the so-called guarantees for minority rights, because guaranteeing minority rights implies the recognition of portions of the community on a race basis. We believe that in our country there shall be no minority, there shall be no majority, there shall just be people. And those people will have the same status before the law, and they will have the same political rights before the law. So in a sense, it will be a completely non-racial egalitarian society.
But will the vast number of blacks, after all their experiences, be able to live a life without giving vent to feelings of revenge, of
yes, we believe it is the duty of the vanguard political movement which brings about change to educate people's outlooks. I mean, in the same way that blacks have never lived in a socialist economic system, they've got to learn to live in one. In the same way that they've always lived in a racially divided society, they've got to learn to live in a non-racial society. They've got many things to learn, and all these must be brought to them and explained to the people by the vanguard movement, which is leading the revolution.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us once again on Pont de Politique on this wonderful and special episode that we are having today on the life and the times of Steve Bantu Biko. Remember, it is a birthday, it's the 70th birthday anniversary of Steve Bantu Biko, a great liberation fighter in the Tanzanian and African liberation struggle, a man who is known to have contributed extensively on developing what we know today as the Black consciousness philosophy. And on this wonderful and auspicious day, we are here to celebrate the life of such an Azanian and an African. And today, on this special episode, we've got three great minds from different political persuasions, but they a measure that is taking on different platforms. One, it is live streamed on YouTube on the Politique page. Please follow that page and subscribe to us, because we need your subscriptions and your following. And also, if you are watching using YouTube channel, make sure that you put also your comments and questions on there, which you would want us to engage our guest today. Also, we are also streaming live via the Wesley Guild South Africa. So for those who are on that page, Wesley Guild South Africa, make sure that you also follow us using that platform as well. You can place your comments, you can place your questions on that page as well. We will be able to try and flight them as much as we can. Thirdly, we are also flighting using Pont de Politique Facebook page, which is now Pont de Politique Facebook page. We are also flighting using that one as well. So we've got a variety of platforms where we are flighting for your convenience and so on and so forth. But many important things we might say, we need you to subscribe on Pont de Politique Facebook, YouTube channel. This is how Pont de Politique is written. Pont de Politique, it's French. Pont de Politique. You subscribe and follow us, and you will be able to see all the episodes that are taking place. Ordinarily, Pont de Politique runs its episodes on Sunday at 6. But because of the great day of Steve Biko, we then opted to say, let us have this conversation on this wonderful birthday of Bantu Biko. Now, as an introduction to this conversation, we have read and we have seen some of the contributors about Biko, and they give their understanding of how do we perceive Steve Biko in the current context. And Africa Andile, Dr. Andile Mafrica, he says about Biko, he says Biko must be understood in 3 different stages, and they are definite. He says he must be understood within 3 different stages. And he says the first stage consists of his heightened participation in the NUSA's leadership and the NUSA's leadership affairs. His experience and his continued relationship with liberal whites, even when he had led a blacks-only breakaway movement. Biko represented what we would know as, or what we would say, it was a political maturity that was unheard of at the time. So that is the first stage of understanding Biko in the eyes and in the understanding of Dr. Andile Mafrica. And then he says the second stage is that Biko managed a political transformation from what many black students at the time knew and believed for a very long time. He says a politics of non-racialism, where he moved Biko to a new and formative unknown black consciousness philosophy. And then he further says, Dr. Mafrica, how Steve Biko, as the leader of SASO, unified black students around this view of black consciousness, and how he led them to commit to the cause of their oppression. That is the second stage with which Dr. Mafrica says we must understand Biko. The third stage, he therefore says, and it is the most important stage in Dr. Mafrica's understanding, he says, when Biko led the social development through community projects, this is an important aspect and an important link that he had created with the black community programs and institutions of the people. The champion that he was for the people and the villages such as Izinyoka, Edwaka, and Welcome Wood in what we know today as the Eastern Cape. He further says the human resources that he managed, that he was committing doctors, nurses, accountants, artisans, artists, drivers, and gardens all together to work together for their people and for their villages. He says the highest point of being, of course, when he became a backroom guide to all development volunteers and political activists in the country. That is a beautiful submission by Dr. Mafrica as to how we understand Biko. But what I don't agree with Dr. Mafrica on the issue of Biko, he writes, and I quote, he says, Biko was self-made. Whatever political training he had, he built it himself. Whatever fortitude he had in the face of brutal monitoring and surveillance of the special branch, he built it himself. Whatever statesmanship he exhibited while raising the question of the black condition, he built it himself. That is why South Africa agreed to invest in Steve Biko as a symbolic significance, close quote. I disagree with Dr. Mafrica on this particular point because Biko was a creation of a context. Biko was a creation of an environment with which he came from. And Biko was not alone in the development of these ideas that he was he wrote about. There were other activists, there were other influences, because ideas do not fall from the sky. An example of one, the older brother of Bantu, was Bukhari. The ideas of Bukhari cannot be overruled. The ideas of his comrades, Biko's comrades, which were around him, also cannot be overruled. The idea that Dr. Mafrika is raising here about Biko and his oneness, it reflects some elements of some liberal ideals and liberal ideas, which I disagree with. But the beautiful submission that he has made about the 3 levels of understanding Biko, I greatly accept. Now, comrades, friends, leadership of these 3 political parties are here with us. They are going to be discussing Biko as we understand him. We've got Comrade Keketso, the Deputy President of Azapo, and also we've got Comrade Lunga Mantashe, who is also the Deputy President of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. As we are still waiting for the president of Landfest, we're still waiting to see where he is. Deputy President of the Azanian Revolution, greetings and good evening. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Thanda. Good evening. Yes, it is. It's an evening.
Good evening, Thand'Olwethu, and thank you so much for having me.
No,
and to the people that are listening.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And as I have already mentioned, that we are still waiting for the president, sorry, of the Blackfest, Landfest. But let us begin and go straight to the discussion of today. I see, Deputy President Mantashe, you are on the road there, so your light might be a little bit problematic. It might be wiser to rather use an audio to make it easy for the eye and those who are watching, so that they can be able to listen rather, so that they don't get distracted. Thank you very much for that. Deputy President Keketso, here is an important day in the eyes and in the ears and in the understanding of the Azanian people, the South African people, the African people in the world. And it is the 75th anniversary of Steve Biko, a beacon in the Azapo and a beacon of Black people in general. Now, I would want you to, both of you, to start by giving us just a few minutes of what you would want to put across to the people who are watching this program. For 2 minutes, just put across what would you want to, the summation that you would want to bring on this 75th anniversary of Biko's birthday. Those few minutes as an opening remarks. It is to you. You can continue, Deputy President. After that, it will be Deputy President Lunga Mantashe of the PAC.
Oh, thank you so much, Luthando. I think for me, it's the understanding that Steve Biko talks about when he says that Black consciousness is an attitude of the mind and a way of life. And I come today to remind Azanians that Black consciousness is an attitude of mind. It is a way of living. Black consciousness is not a noun. Black consciousness is a verb. It is what we grow up calling a doing word. It is an action word. It is waking up in a world that seeks to diminish your being into non-existence. It is a calling that says, in a world where being Black is nothing, where the world sees you as nothing, where the world treats you with indignity, where the oppressors have taken so much from you that you yourself tend to forget that you are worthy. Black consciousness says, wake up and be conscious of the fact that you are here, and be conscious of your presence as a Black person. I think it's quite poignant that with Steve Biko, was trying to, well, literally was against the idea of being called non-Black and insisted that he be referred to as Black. There is so much power in this identity of Blackness. Blackness speaks to the purity of color. Black is at its strongest when you have zero spectrums penetrating it. So when there is absolutely zero light or pink or purple or green or orange penetrating it, Black is at its strongest. So when you go out into the world and you call yourself Black, identity means that you identify as anti-slavery, anti-oppression, anti-indignity, and anti-obscurity. For me, Steve Biko represents, gives me the right to stand tall, gives me the right to say I am in a world that says I do not see you, in a world that says you don't exist, in a world that consistently looks for ways to diminish my existence as a human being. And I think it's quite poignant that we get here on his 75th birthday. And as Azapo, we are saying that he is born again because, as you know, Steve Biko lives in me. His messaging, his ideals live in me and give me the right to tread on this earth with dignity and pride. And we need that more than ever.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Deputy President, for those opening words. Deputy President Lunga, Mantashe, can you give us your submission, 2 minutes?
Right. Thank you, Thando. And also let me send my greetings to Comrade Keketso, the Deputy President of AZAPU. And I think that it's a great opportunity to have an important conversation about Steve Biko. And I do want to indicate, Thando, at the beginning that this conversation takes place in a context where some Black people have transitioned into becoming a middle class in South Africa, a territory that is very problematic because it is a territory of some form of double consciousness. Consciousness of being Black on one hand, and then the consciousness of kind of moving away from your own, because most of the Black middle class people no longer live amongst the people. They live within their own particular economic context. So I would like to say that this is a very important conversation in the sense that the notion of Black consciousness was supposed to be an idea of becoming aware, not only becoming aware of the self and being proud of the self, but becoming aware of the social economic position one occupies in society. At the time of Biko, one of the most fundamental elements of Black consciousness is this idea of the cognitive dimension, the state of the mind, the state of the body. And this might seem a little bit complex, but our relationship with white people has been a relationship of the control of the body, not only the mind, but controlling the body by beginning from the mind, which is to say, by oppressing the mind in order to make the body take into the habit of submission, into the habit of docility, subservience, inferiority, nothingness, as Comrade Keketso was saying. So I think that it's important to explore the cognitive dimension of Black people 75 years later, to look at how that cognitive dimension, for example, is aware from a national consciousness point of view, but also how aware is it from a class position perspective, right? Because post-1994, one cannot run away from the fact that the black person is no longer just a black person, but he is a black person who is the middle class. He's the black person who is the most dejected at Mkukwini and so on. I think this is going to be a critical conversation to have. The second dimension, before I sit down, I'm sorry, is going to be the dimension of culture and culturing. Because
and please summarize it there, DP.
Sure, because to be black, because to be black historically is to be structured and cultured as a particular species in order to behave, to be a particular person. So I think it's critical to have that dimensional conversation, cognitive, cultural, and economic dimension, particularly in the 21st century.
Thank you. Thank you very much, DP, for those opening remarks. And this now brings us to the conversation and to start the conversation. And you've heard the two guests bringing in some opening and beautiful remarks about how we should understand Biko and how we should look into the 75th anniversary birthday of Steve Biko. And there are various aspects that have been put across. Like, for instance, Comrade Keketso mentioned something in relation to the rebirth, born again, and which is something that I would want us to engage on a conversationally on that aspect. But that rebirth would also be looking into what the Deputy President of the PAC is talking about when he says there must be a cognitive dimension that we must consider, because there won't be a rebirth if there is not a cognitive dimension that must be engaged on. And he made an example of imikuku, poverty, and the middle class, so-called middle class, the class question that has come through into these post-1994 South Africa. Now, I'm asking the viewers, please make your comments, write your questions as we are going along. We are in a conversation now to make this thing not about the two deputy presidents, but about all of us. DP, Mantashe is talking about the cognitive dimension, and you spoke a little bit about the rebirth of Biko. I mean, the Biko is born again. Sorry, I'm using that. Tina, Kasi City, Biko is born again. This is our team. We're accepting Biko. Because we are moving into another dimension. Converse with the Deputy President of the PAC. Talk about Biko and tell people how you would unpack Biko's contribution leadership-wise, Biko's contribution legacy-wise, and so on and so forth, with first understanding and solving the issue or attending to the problem of cognitive dimension. I'm throwing the ball into both of you.
I think Deputy President is actually quite correct in talking about the cognitive issues of blackness. I think we first need to understand Biko and the context of his life and what was happening around him. When he diagnosed the situation and he said the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressor, he wasn't talking from not seeing what was happening. We first have to see that apartheid was a psychological warfare waged on Black people. For apartheid to succeed, the mind and the cognitive abilities of Black people had to be destroyed. For it to remain alive today, it was necessary to ensure that there would be intergenerational transfer of this destruction of the Black mind and the oppression of that mind, which we are now seeing the results of 27 years later. When the oppressor goes and negotiates with the ANC and says, let's talk a settlement of sorts, They already knew that Project Apartheid had succeeded. They had succeeded in dehumanizing Black people. They had succeeded in creating a state of indignity. They had succeeded in creating a state of self-hate. They had succeeded in creating a place, a thing where that places white people as angelic and perfect and something that all of us must aspire to. The thing that we now call the assimilation that he speaks of when he talks of the so-called middle class, which I call the working class. We don't really have a big Black working class. What we have is a bunch of people that live in Midrand, overstacked places where they can't actually breathe because there's so many of them. And yet these people think that they have arrived somehow because they drive a BMW 1. And yet the reality of the situation is, firstly, they have not arrived. They do not own the land. They live in sectional titles. They do not own any means of production. So they are the working class. However, they have been conditioned to look at themselves, because remember, it is said that we hate the most that which we are. So when they look at the conditions of Black people, the only way that they can make themselves feel better is by looking at their own with disdain and pretending to be the other, so that they can feel better about themselves, where the reality of the situation is all of us just need to go back and say, we are a wounded people. We were strategically and systematically wounded as people. And until such time that we go back and we fix that which was wounded in us, the mind, free the mind, because that has not begun to happen. The squalor within which our people live is indicative of the sickness that apartheid has embedded in our system and in our psyche. It is so critical that we...
Just to disturb you a bit, sorry, just to disturb you a bit there, Deputy President, is that there's an issue of conditionality, and just highlight that point because it is important. I would like even Deputy President Mantashe to also speak to that when you are done making that point.
Right. So we are conditioned to self-hate. We are conditioned to indignity that we accept it. It becomes, we imbibe this view of ourselves by the oppressor, and we have made it ours. And so we treat ourselves with disrespect and indignity, and we treat our people with the same level of disrespect and indignity. You can't really blame the ANC for what it is doing. These are hurt people who are hurting their own people. Comrade President.
DP, Mantashe.
Yes, I think I do agree with the principal analysis that you can't oppress people successfully unless they believe you, they believe it, and unless they accept oppression. So Black people had accepted colonialism, and historically, before the emergence of Biko, for example, they had engaged colonialism in a submissive way, in a docile way. They had sought to be integrated into a colonial project, right? And this is why after the ANC in 1913, once the Land Act was passed, and the ANC had been formed in 1912, and the Land Act was passed in 1913, what did the ANC do? It rushed to England, right? Why do you rush to England when your country, is taken over by England? What do you want England to do? What do you want the Queen to do? In other words, once colonialism had started, it had done proper miseducation to enable colonialism and apartheid, later apartheid, to succeed. And what apartheid did was not only to condition us, but to condition us as a divided Black people in terms of the Group Areas Act, in terms of the Registrations Act. It was not sufficient that Thando must be Black, but Thando had to be Black and Xhosa, right? And Thando, it was not sufficient for Thando to simply be Xhosa. He had to be some dialect of Xhosa. He had to be Baga. He had to be something else. And so this idea of cognitive, of implanting cognitive, what I could call cognitive structures. In other words, the way of knowing your own black fellow man, to know him, and not so much as a fellow brother or as a fellow sister, but to know him as an other in the form of a tribe. And so what Biko does is not to talk about a tribe, but to talk about the consciousness that black people entirely need to have. And this actually emerges from, you know, people like Lembede in the 40s, the idea of seeing black people, not necessarily as tribes. So I think this conversation about cognitive structures, the way in which black people come to know the world, they come to know the world through what they have been told the world is like. And they've been told what the world is like by white people, by colonialism, by white supremacy, and so on. And so when racism comes in, and I think it's important actually, Thando, to flip the coin a little bit and to talk about how Biko talks about white people's cognitive structure, right?
Please do that.
Yeah, because Biko talks about the fact that when white people come here, right, they come in for economic reasons, but at some point they develop this hatred. In other words, hatred isn't the sort of thing that they come with when they come, but they develop this hatred in order to legitimize and to justify the fact that they have dehumanized, exploited the dejected, dispossessed black people. So if you look at how then this turns upside down the psychology of white people, right? It's easy to go to someone like Paulo Freire and talks about how this dehumanization has not only affected black people, but has affected white people, because their own cognitive structures are so cognitive structures of colonizers.
And it has been affected. Yes, it has been affected.
Exactly. And colonization can't be a good thing, you know, and colonizers therefore can't be fully human until there's no colonization, and there can never be no colonization until you've got the land back, right? And so the idea of the cognitive structures, the way which white people and black people behave, demonstrates a state of unfreedom, right? So I wanted to engage this point of this cognitive dimension in that light.
No, thank you for that, Mantashe. Now, because you guys are really speaking on the aspect of the conditionality, which is very important to answering the question for those people who have not heard about Biko, for those people who are still learning in understanding Biko, and for those people who have never met Biko, and for those people who are not even members of AZAPO, the Black Consciousness Movement, and the PAC, how would you therefore say Biko sought to overcome this conditionality of a black person? I know Comrade Keketso has already mentioned that the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressed is the mind of the oppressed, and that specific code. But what is important for me and for those who are watching is how did Biko do this in practical terms, and therefore how do we do it, Comrade Keketso? How do we get out of that element of conditionality? Because that element of conditionality is the one that has created, in the argument of President Nelvis Keketso, has created a way of thinking that says we must go and vote for the land. How did Biko sought to overcome this, and how should we overcome this problem? I'm asking this question to both of you so that it can we help those people who have never seen, heard, or read Biko, or are not part of these two organizations that are represented today.
I think quite key is the reason why I am in Black Consciousness. The reason why I am a member of AZAPO is trying to undo everything that I was taught. I will start by saying, first and foremost, awareness is key. When you see yourself acting in the way that they want you to act, you need to call yourself to order. Let me give you a classical example. Right now, by our mere definition of success is living in the suburbs, proximity to whiteness. Our children going to schools and being taught by the enemy, proximity to whiteness. Our sounding, when we sound like them, when we eat like them, when we dress like them, when we imbibe their culture and religion, our proximity to whiteness defines our success. It starts there, where then you need to question yourself and your motives and your reasons for doing things. Why do I want to live in the suburbs? And I'm not saying don't go and live with the white people. It's important that we make them uncomfortable in their spaces and live there so that we don't live in the small little spaces that they have assigned to us. However, what is your motive? Why is it that you think it's so important for you to go and live in the suburbs? Is it because you want proximity to whiteness? And if that is the case, then begin to ask yourself, why is that so important to you? Because it is critical that as Black people, we begin to define success differently. We define success by our African standards of all is not well with me unless all is well with my neighbor. Because where we are sitting, this individualistic culture that we have inherited from the white folks is creating problems for us. So I think I look at what Steve Biko was saying and saying, you must be a person or a community that self-determines. Firstly, who are you? What do you stand for? What defines you? Secondly, you must have self-sufficiency as a person, as a community, as a family. What does that mean? As a nation. It means we are feeding ourselves, we are educating ourselves, we are self-reliant, we are not waiting on other people to create jobs for our children. Because when they create jobs for our children, for us, they determine what we must sound like. They determine what we must look like. When you have work policies that say you can't have an afro, yeah, you work for them. So you must fit into their culture, and until such time that we recognize that being self-sufficient means that we can self-determine. And that's what Steve Biko was trying to teach us. Be your own person. Be self-reliant. Innovation and entrepreneurship are critical if we are going to move into the direction where the Black person can self-determine. We cannot be waiting for the West to decide. Right now, all of us are sitting here going, yo, here's a fourth revolution. They are determining that agenda. Whatever that agenda is determined by them. So it serves them more than it serves us. It's created a space for them. And if you look at how they develop these algorithms perpetuate the racism that we have physically experienced. It is now in the digital space. You know why? Because they are determining where the world is going. Africa is nowhere to be seen. Black people are nowhere.
on whiteness.
And superiority and control, and more than anything, it is about the hatred of human beings. Thina singabantu. There is this thing that makes us who we are, our relationship with ourselves, with each other, and with nature. This thing that they are creating of machines is not who we are, and therefore it will always disadvantage us.
I'm going to ask you to hold that point, because it will be our next point of discussion, because I just want Deputy President Mantashe to speak to this issue of how did Biko and how should we today overcome that point, so that we just take that question out of the way, and then we will flight 2 questions that are on the field for your answers. Just briefly on how did Biko do this overcoming of this conditionality, Deputy President Mantashe, and how should we do it now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think was central, in the way that Biko had engaged himself was, I think you mentioned some of the stuff in your opening remarks, the importance of encouraging professionals, people who are educated in even at the time in colonial spaces, to do what Fanon said, to snatch from the colonizer some of the instruments of its own destruction, to take from them and to go and service communities, get closer, get immersed to communities, and which was what the point that was Sobukwe was making, what education should mean to us, the service to Africa, to bring us closer to communities as opposed to a distance, to apply that which we are snatching from the system that colonizes us, and to apply some of those key elements, because whether you like it or not, you get into a contradiction with the European in the classroom, and you learn some of the things by force, things that don't apply to you, to your own condition and to your own context. But you get some level of elements of education that you are able to use for the benefit and the service of the African people. But if you look at our own situation, currently, we don't do that, particularly people who are educated. So that is just one example. But the point that, Biko, I think the greater point that Biko was making was the point that the Deputy President is talking about, the point of self-determination, the point of self-sufficiency, because with that comes true independence. And that was the point that Sobukwe was making. You see, the point of being self-sufficient and a self-determining nation, so that you don't wake up tomorrow and you have a load shedding, and you are told that the way to solve this load shedding is to sell ESCOM to private companies, and then things are going to become better. It's not when things go bad at the SAA to say, oh, we need to sell SAA because it's got a bloated debt of about 20 billion rand. So we need to sell it to a private individual. So this idea of self-determination, this idea of self-sufficiency is very critical. But how do you encourage that, Thando, in a context, in a neo-colonial context, post-apartheid? How do you encourage that in a neoliberal South Africa? How do you make that possible? There are some things that, Pan-Africanists and people in the BCM can do, and that is to insist on pushing for cooperatives that are a model of how we see the economy of this country, of how we see the people of this country working together in collaboration as a cooperative. In other words, running also these cooperatives, Thando, along the socialist lines of economic management, right? And why is that important? That's important because you don't want to model a behavior of a society you're not trying to build. If we're trying to build a free society, a self-sufficient society, a self-determining society, then we need to create cooperatives that give power to the collective members of those cooperatives to run those cooperatives democratically not only to run them democratically, but to run them along socialist lines. What are socialist lines? Where you engage in the most equitable distribution of income and resources and wealth. But what that means is that we need to have access to the productive forces, the instruments of production, right? And maybe I'll pause here because that's a question that we also need to engage. Yeah.
Sorry, DP. And this is an important point that you are raising, and it links to the point that Comrade Keketso was speaking about of one for all and all for one, the question of humanity. And you are raising an issue of democratic, the socialist lines, democratic principles, and so on and so forth. And I want us to hold this thought, because I need to give these questions preference, and then we will be able to come back. I will remind you, both of you, on these on these points that you've put across. But I've got 4 questions that I'm going to fly through for you. This is the first question. The first question speaks to, it comes from Nonzaba Dumisa Kabaneka. He talks about that Biko was not only a freedom fighter, but he was also a political theoretician. And he therefore says he was able to come up with a clear political ideology. He tuned his sight into great prophetic and formidable vision that we agree on. Now he says, why don't we replace the Immanuel Kant, the Karl Barths, the Derridas of the current education system in our country for the submission of Biko's work and other African philosophers who were contextual in their understanding. He then says, what is the South African philosophy without Biko and Sobukwe? With an understanding that why are they not forming part of that particular discussion? Now, the second question comes from Group Ntisana. She's asking 2 questions. One of them is, it relates to you, Comrade Keketso, and it says, you were talking about the innovation. She says, we are innovating towards what alternative? So that is the point, towards what alternative would we as Africans be innovating on? And then she further says, perhaps we need to have a deeper understanding of whiteness. And that also, we can just try and give an outline of what do we mean by whiteness. And then the last question that we are taking now is from Mngxitama. He says, when we say Biko is born again, does it imply he was dead all along? And then he makes a comment. He says, both his ideas and interpretation are of a pre-1994 and post-1994 Azania. So please make a comment on that. So, Deputy President Keketso, I would like you to try and start with some of those questions. And if you say we need to fly to them, we will keep on reminding. And then the Deputy President also can respond after you're done.
There is a question that challenges me the most, and that is the question of the definition of whiteness.
Yes.
You know, when you speak of whiteness, you instill a sense of fear in me, because that's all I remember whiteness to be. It is this thing that I fear. It is this thing that sends me to obscurity. It is this thing that I should aspire to. This thing of superiority, this thing that says, Mena, I don't exist. So I don't think I have spent enough time trying to understand what it is that they bring to the table that makes me obscure or that makes me insignificant. I do know that it oppresses me and that it scares me. And subsequently, I'm being honest, that it wounds me to the point of being afraid to confront it. And therefore, I look at it and I say, I see you, but I choose to focus on myself and getting myself to a place where I am worthy of being, of treading on this earth. And so I ignore the symbol that oppresses me by not giving it credence and studying it as deeply as I'm trying to study myself, because I feel like I need to understand myself better. So I'm being honest and I'm being upfront and saying the concept of whiteness for me is that which has been instilled in my mind as godly and superior, and sitting somewhere in that place where I should aspire to be perfect and clean and worthy. And all of those things. So I haven't really quite, I'm going to be honest and say I haven't quite engaged the subject of whiteness. I just know that it is my enemy. So that's the first.
It's okay.
The second point is the issue of Steve Biko not sitting in the place of a great philosopher. I think you have to understand that, you know, I tell the story of how I was taken from black schools and put into white people's schools. And then when I got there, all I found was black cleaners and cooks and all of those things. And the only thing I could see that reflected me was the cleaners and the workers and the servants. The people who were giving me knowledge were white. And so when we speak about black people adding to the body of knowledge, I don't think the system, which is predominantly white, which is predominantly anti-black, wants to acknowledge that black people are thinkers, to acknowledge that black people are visionaries, and that, you know, the likes of Steve Biko are philosophers that should be in our textbooks. Because if they do, somewhere a black child is going to recognize that actually we are intellectually superior to some of these people that we are made to hero worship. Actually, we are the ones that gave the world the concept of medicine, of surgery, of science and mathematics. Actually, in my genes runs this ability to create a body of knowledge, and therefore I am worthy myself. It is important that they keep us as perpetual students and perpetual people that need white people to educate and to make better. Remember, colonialism, when it came, simply took away what it is that we already had that was working and replaced it with their systems so that we can think that what they were bringing was better. So it's, you know, it's not a mistake. No. It's very intentional that he is not there, because they are the ones who need to define knowledge and intellectual and academia. They need to define it because they seem to think that they own education. Meanwhile, Africa gave them education. So I think that's, you know, that's the basis of it. And when we speak about innovation, when Africans innovate, they, you know, I think it speaks to that thing that I was going to, that talks about I am because you are, and all is not well with me unless all is well with my neighbor. Africans, when they innovate to help each other. We innovate from the place of what is our current situation, what is our problem. So when you look at how we produce medicine, for instance, we look at what is ailing our people, and we look at the earth and say, what does the earth give us? And we innovate around that and make medicine. We do not innovate to take over the world, to dominate others for capital reasons. And this is why, if you look at African traditional medicine, it is a skill that is passed on from generation to generation. It's not we do not have IP rights. We are not a people of IP rights where we protect the information that we know that others cannot access it. No. We have that passing down of information, of knowledge as Africans. That's how we innovate. We innovate around our problems, and we also work together in solving our problems. And I think it is critical that as Africans, we go back to those models, which I call Black logic. We go back to Black logic that says, what are our problems? What do we have at our disposal that nature has given us? Because nobody understands our natural resources and how they work better than us. And so that gives us our point of excellence, and it gives us our point of superiority in terms of what it is that we offer the world. So we can go into, when we're looking to innovate, we can then go back to nature and position Africa as the place that will be the future of medicine. We started medicine. We gave them medicine as they know it today. So we need to own that and say, The problems we have lie in the natural resources we have in this continent, but we are going to innovate and use modern science to be able to then provide solutions for these pandemics and diseases that the world has failed to solve, that we know we have solutions for. The kind of innovation I'm talking about, internalized innovation that celebrates us as a people.
There was a question that was coming from Mngxitama, and that talks about, was Biko dead all along? If Azapo says is born again, just summarize this one, and then we'll give it to David President Mantashe.
Okay, no, I think it's saying Biko multiplied. When we say that he's born again in us today, because we carry the spirit of Biko and his messaging in our beings. And we have the responsibility of then taking that Biko into the people. When I said that Black consciousness is an action word, it is for us to take Black consciousness to our communities, to show our people that have been dehumanized for so long what Black consciousness is, which I always say is medicine. Black consciousness is the medicine that our people need. So when we say that Steve Biko is born again, he is reborn in each and every one of us. Biko is in me, Biko is in you, Biko is in all of us that believe in Black consciousness, because that is the medicine that we need to give to our people, so that they can know that they are not the pain, they are not the indignity, they are not obscurity, that they do matter, and that they have a right to this earth. And so, yeah, that's what we mean.
Thank you very much, Deputy President, for that. Deputy President Lunga, Mantashe, 4 questions, similar questions, and they talk to the South African education and bringing in the Biko aspect and the alternative innovation, and what is that alternative? And also, then you make an additional comment on those questions that we put across. Can you come and give us the answer, DP?
Yeah, I just wanted to start on the question about whiteness. You know, I think probably the simplest way to try for me to explain is that I know there has been Pfizer, you know, Pfizer is a white company of America, multi-billion-dollar company, comes to African countries and tells them that whatever I negotiate with you, don't tell your people who voted for you. Those are the terms, you know, and conditions. And they say, if somebody takes me to court as Pfizer, I cannot be litigated, you know. In other words, above the law, the laws of your land. I'm above the laws of your land. You can't litigate me. If somebody tries to litigate me because there's a side effect in the vaccine or whatever happens, I die, whatever, then you go and you defend me in a court of law. So that's Pfizer. It's a private company in America telling national governments of Africa and elsewhere that they are immune from any charge, from any law of any land. And those countries must do as Pfizer pleases. If somebody donates a vaccine to you, don't take it until I tell you to do so. You know, so whiteness as an adverb, you know, with a ness, the state of being white, not the state of being white merely by color, but recognizing this state of being white by color. But the state of being white itself is not merely by color. It is underlined by imperial power. That is to say, the power to impose the rules of the game, and the power to make rules, to remake rules, and to be king. You know, the king. The king makes rules, and the king is rules. You know, so imperialism. So that's whiteness. If you're looking at a white person who gets treated better than Thando, you're looking at imperialism incarnate. Whiteness. The condition of being white in the world.
Being superior.
Okay, we don't have time. Yeah, we don't have time to go was the second question? The
second question related. Yeah.
Thank you. If you live in a country that is colonized by another, they decide what you are going to be taught. They decide how you're going. They decide when you are going to be taught, whether when you are a baby or when you are in grade 10 or 12 or at varsity, and so on. They impose their own philosophy. Look at our constitution, property rights. What notion is this property rights? It's a Lockean view. It's a Stuart Mill's view that if you encircle a land, it's your land. What's the notion of title deeds? It's a Lockean view, Stuart Mill's view, right? That's the view. Then they impose it on us to live by their rules. That's the name of the game, imperialism. And so you're not going to see Biko in the books of history being taught as a subject. If you see Biko being taught as a subject, he's going to be distorted. They're going to mistrain and miseducate teachers who are going to teach.
It's what is already happening.
Yes. For example, if you want to go and know about the so-called Human Rights Day, you find a distorted version of what happened in 1960. It's in the textbooks. They teach lie. You understand? And the teachers that teach, who have no understanding of history, repeat the lie. And the student learns the lie, imbibes the lie, and so on. That's the name of the game, imperialism. So because philosophy is universal and universalistic, its logic rises above a nation. It is an international kind of philosophy that covers the wide spectrum. So Biko says, for example, the whole world's freedom depends on Africa being free first, because everybody steals from us. So we must be free first. And Ferrer says that the dehumanizer cannot lead the conversation about humanization of the world.
Because they
come from the position of privilege and power. And they were part of, they're perpetuators. And then you come to this country, there's a TRC, there's a white man and a black man, they're both trying to talk to each other, talking past each other. They can't understand each other. Then they pretend to understand each other at the level of sentiment and emotion. And then they pretend that there was a reconciliation and peace, and then yesterday they have fun, and so on. It's unfortunate. What was the third question?
The third question was, no, the third question came directly. They were for the deputy president of AZAPO. They were not for you per se, but okay. There was you've answered the other two. Now we'll get back to these other questions. There was a point that you guys spoke about. Comrade Keketso was speaking about one for all and all for one. And Comrade Mantashe continued to speak about the issue of establishing close cooperations as an African people that are centering the humanity in it. And then Deputy President Mantashe just now, he just spoke again about the issue of the universality of the philosophy of Biko and the philosophy of Sobukwe. And I think it is important to always understand that ideas don't come or don't fall from the sky. They come, then they influence each other. So that's why the Sobukwe aspect comes in. Now, when you talk about Comrade Keketso and the Deputy President Mantashe, when you talk about the humanity, the centering of humanity, and how Biko said it, to say the black consciousness is an antithesis to the whiteness, white supremacy, which is a thesis in the South African context. And therefore, he was seeking a true humanity, which is what Comrade Keketso was talking about, one for all and all for one. Deputy President Mantashe, the socialistic element of running corporations. Can you please, guys, help me to expand a little bit on this aspect of the humanity, making the world more human in Biko's ideals? How can we make the world more human? Using that example of corporations as an African people, AZAPO, PAC, and all those other black consciousness movements merging together to create a world that is more human. Thank you. How do we do that human aspect in the conversation, one for all? Mastale kuwe Mantashe.
Yeah, I think I've already outlined some contours of this. Number one, if we lived in the world in which we tried to solve the problem, education must be for liberation. It must not be education to merely get somebody to go and work, or to merely get somebody to go and employ another person. That is not how you build a free society. The idea of schooling itself needs to be reconceptualized. The idea of taking somebody to go to school to merely engage in rote learning, in recitations, and so on and so on. We need to deal with how schools and universities educate. But that also means we need to deal with the pedagogies that are used in universities, the way teaching itself takes place. Because a lot of bad stuff, let me use that slang language, a lot of bad stuff about how to be a human being is learned at school. You understand? And a lot of bad stuff about how to be a good social human being is learned in society. Which kind of society, Thando, is that? Is the impoverished society, the landless society, the criminal society, the one that turns into criminals, precisely because there's no other way of becoming in society except to become a criminal and so on. So I'm saying that is another contour, right? If you build cooperatives, don't run cooperatives like private businesses, like corporations. Don't run them like you're running Apple, or like you're running ESCOM, or like you're running another private corporation, even the one that claims to be under the control of the state. Run cooperatives, and the people that run those cooperatives must have full control, and they must run them democratically. They must not be run top down by means of hierarchy. What are you teaching there when you run cooperatives like that? You're teaching people to assume power. Henry Clark teaches us that the purpose of education must be to teach us how to properly handle power. You can't handle power if you are powerless, and you can't be powerful if you are a worker of somebody, and you can't be even a good citizen, to use a slang language again, if you don't know how to run a firm, right? If you are simply asked to turn a machine on and turn it off. So these are some of the contours, and then you have to talk about the equitable distribution of resources, power. Now, people always make a false assumption that people who go and vote have some kind of power, simply because they can all go and put an X. Or people who are accused of the same crime in a court of law. They don't have the same power, precisely because they don't have an equitable. You're living in a society that equitably distributes resources. Instead, what happens is that wealth is redistributed, and you note the suffix, redistributed, not distributed, right?
Distributed, yes.
That means we still function under what can be properly called a trickle-down economics, you know, where the business is going to donate and people are going to become the charity case of a business. And then businesses are going to go and claim tax breaks. You can't run a society like that if you want it to be free. So these are some of the basic contours. It's a pity we don't have the time to run through all these contours in detail.
Yes. Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you, the Deputy President. One for all for one, Comrade Keketso, making the world more humanistic.
I think, you know, white people would find that concept quite foreign because they are taught to own, to take, to subdue, to colonize, to enslave. And so the concept of working for the greater good of humanity is foreign to them. We see that even in the days of pandemics, in the day when humanity is in danger, that the desire to profit trumps the desire to save lives. That is clearly, and in no other words, capitalism at its best. When you must make a profit, even at the expense of humanity. And so we envisage a different way as Africans because we have always lived this way. We've always lived communally for the better good of society, of community. So when the DP talks about AMA cooperatives, I'm reminded of the fact that, for instance, we have communities that have land, and not just land that could be used to develop products that would make those communities self-sustaining. There's a community where, for instance, we know that prickly pear grows freely in KwaZulu-Natal and in some areas in Limpopo. It is, I think at the moment we are buying a liter of prickly pear oil for 1,500 Rand a liter. If we were, if we were able to show that particular community that if we worked together to propagate this species and buy this cheap machine, because it's very cheap, we would then be able to extract the oil and then sell this oil, and subsequently the profits of could pay salaries for, you know, young people who are able to work. And like any other company, whatever is a profit after paying your overall cost, which is your cost of labor and everything else, could then be used to buy the toilets that we need for that school that is now using pit latrines, where communities can be self-sustaining, where they're not waiting for a government to give them hand-me-downs, because that is an African. Africans make things work. We are solution-driven. That we have been reduced to these people with a begging bowl is indicative of the success of apartheid, which was to dehumanize us, but also to make us subjects of the state. And so it is so important that we put the power to self-sustain in our communities by reminding our people that the reason why we lived so beautifully with nature as Africans is because all that we need is in nature, be it the green gold that we speak of, the bioeconomy. All of that is in the land we now want to go back and take back, because that is where our power is. So we are going to do that, but at the same time, there needs to be an education of Black people to stop extending their hands to receive help. We are not deceived.
This beggar attendance.
Yes. So those cooperatives must, when we talk about self-sustainability, we're talking about being able to look at what natural resources are around us. And some people it's aloe vera, aloe ferox. For other people, it's gold. For other people, like that farm that's sitting in the Free State that some white person bought for 8 Rand. That has helium. They want the helium. Okay, sure. Let's find sustainable ways to get it out of the earth so that it can serve our people. But it is our land. So we can go in there and make sure that the people in that particular community are the ones who are mining that sustainably and benefiting. So this thing, Nanzinto, when the ANC government talks of AMA cooperatives, they do it in such a demeaning way. So they go there and these Black women sew pinafores that have no market. So you are selling and you are making these pinafores. Who are you selling them to? What is the value add? How much are you making from that? So they make our people do these mundane little things that don't really grow communities or make it a significant income. That's not what we are talking about. That's not who we are. When I talk about Black people as innovators, from time immemorial, we were the ones that were digging lead. So we were digging gold. We were making things that made the world sustainable from time immemorial. So now all of a sudden you are belittling us to Abumama Abatunge pinafores. That's not who we are. So we need to find our own power so that we are sustainable and do proper innovation.
And that would speak to the issue of humanity and the humanness of how Biko understood it. Now let's move, because you are political beings, not primarily. You are social beings, but you are secondary political beings. When I'm saying you are political beings, you belong to political organizations, as I had mentioned in the beginning. So now we're going to take questions that are more direct to the political party machinery, the organizational outlook. And I know that some of the questions might not be easy to answer because you are not given any mandate to ask those questions, but these are nice questions. Now, there is a question that speaks to, it comes from Ulinda Kwame. Iti question Kalinda Kwame. If one, what do you think Biko would have identified as the low-hanging fruits for both the PAC and AZAPO to truly achieve real uhuru, in the words of Letambulu, for our people? So that is question number one. What would now it talks to the conversation that we've seen also on social media about the PAC and meeting up with the AZAPO presidents, talking and talking. So what would Biko identify as the low-hanging fruits? The second question, which speaks to the issue of the political parties, is that it comes from Nonzaba. It is about the question on what is the position of the PAC, BLF, unfortunately there's no BLF representative here, and AZAPO on Kwanzaa, which starts on the 27th, in remembering our relationship with ourselves. And he further explains this to say, the Kwanzaa speaks to what Deputy President of the PAC called Ujama. What practical, simple ways can be done to speak to that particular aspect? And the last one would be on that. Can you please guys host spaces? So spaces are those Twitter spaces on these issues so that we can reach a wider audience. So those are the three organizational questions that we are putting across. So Comrade Mantashe, start with the low-hanging fruits. What would Biko identify as low-hanging fruits? And then Comrade Keketso, you will take the other questions after that.
Yeah, thanks, Thando. I'm sorry, I'm going to ask that you release me at some point very soon. Yeah, I'm in the middle of the road. I need to keep going. You know? But on the question of what are some of the issues of convergence? I think let me use that as a point. What are some of the issues of convergence? I think there's a fundamental and a central question, and that is the question of land. I sincerely believe that this is precisely what AZAPO also believes in, that the land needs to return to its rightful owners. And the rightful owners of the land are African people, not European settlers. And I think that there is a possibility of converging on the point about the constitution of this country. That the constitution of this country is a sham, it's a sellout document, it's a colonial document that perpetuates colonialism, imperialism, neoliberalism, and neocolonialism. And if we begin from that premise, that the primary contradiction in South Africa today is that there are settlers who have been given citizenship in 1955 by the ANC and who have since 1996 been given constitutional guarantees to perpetuate private ownership of our land. That, I think, is an important point of convergence. That I think I at the top of my head is a matter that we could really explore ourselves and AZAPO. On the second question, sorry, did you want me to answer this one only?
Please.
Okay. So this question was about what should be the position, or what is the position of the PAC. So I'm not at liberty to comment intelligently and say this is the position of the PAC. But I think that it can be taken for granted that the PAC supports everything African and is suspicious of everything European. And if you look at Christmas, Christmas is not only a European invention, you know, connected to pagan gods of Europe and Rome. A lot less 7 days from the 17th to the from the 16th to the 25th of December. It is also a lie about Jesus Christ being born on the 25th, which is also historically false and religiously blasphemous. So I think that if we flow from our own perspective that we are, as the PAC, Africanistic in orientation, then our orientation is that we need to advance and celebrate everything African, everything that seeks to promote and project the African personhood in the light of a true human being capable of naming events. Because now currently we are under some Christmas named, not by us, but named for us and the whole world to celebrate. So we have no responsibility to celebrate European pagan gods. You know, that's not our responsibility. And so I think I'm speaking fairly when I say it is a true reflection of an Africanistic outlook or orientation to say anything African must be celebrated and anything European must not be celebrated and must be treated with serious caution.
Thank you very much for that, David, President of the PAC.
Are you going to release me at some point?
Can you? I wanted you to make your last point so that you can be released, and then we will remain with Deputy President Keketso.
All right, Thando, I want to thank you for organizing this important session and talk. There is, Biko is a thesis of 1,000 years. He cannot be, we cannot finish talking about him on a single day. He's a very important historical figure, and he's a figure of a man, of a student of Sobukwe, who had high regard for Sobukwe. Sobukwe, our founding president. And therefore, there's a deep connection at various levels of critical importance between ourselves and AZAPO. And I think for you to have called AZAPO to this particular session with the PAC, I think it's a very important step forward. And I do hope that these conversations can continue. And I do, want to say that when the PAC itself has been able to, come out with a certain set of principles of engagement, with AZAPO, this kind of conversation should not end and it should continue, because the liberation of the African people needs the left to work in harmony for the liberation of the African people. And I hope that this program is aired again and we have another conversation. Thank you.
Deputy President Keketso, Deputy Mantashe is leaving. Any words that you would like to say to him?
Yes, of course. Comrade Deputy President, thank you so much for having made the time and for your insightful views on this. And I think I'd like to echo the sentiment where you speak of the left. The consolidation of the left is critical to the Black masses of South Africa. It is critical to the continent. It's so important that these conversations between the PAC and AZAPO not just continue, but they emanate in projects that are going to materially change the lives of our people. So I'm very grateful that we are sitting here today understanding that what should be the opposition, the political opposition of this mistaken government of the day should have been the leftist organizations of AZAPO and PAC. And we now understand that by dropping the balls in the manners that we have over the years, we have disadvantaged our people. And it is now time for us to consolidate. It is now time for us to energize Black consciousness, because like I said, it is the medicine that we need to change the lives of our people, but also to start fighting back for the liberation of our people, because the liberation of our people was never really achieved. So we are not former liberation movements. We are liberation movements who now recognize that we need to liberate our people, and we need to do it today.
Thank you very much on that note. Deputy President of the PAC, you are released you can continue on your journey. Thank you very much for making the time. Let's continue with our questions.
Thank you, Ghana, and thank you, Comrade Keketso. Thank you.
Be safe.
Yeah, and as you have heard, that question that was coming from Ulinda Kwame, Deputy President, we are about 3 minutes into our closing. So I would like you to run through these 3 questions that came through. The low-hanging fruits from Linda Kwame, and also the question of the Kwanzaa as an aspect of consideration by AZAPO and PAC.
Okay. So in terms of the low-hanging fruit, I mean, I don't think we differ much. It's the land. The land. The Constitution, I agree, is also quite problematic. We focus. We need to get the land back for our people. We need to definitely get rid of this Constitution that doesn't serve our people and everything that came with this 1994 settlement that really disadvantaged our people. We all know that. But I think primary and very center to that is the conversation that we just had with the Deputy President that says that we need to consolidate the left. More than ever, the fragmentation of Black people is creating a base of disempowerment. We are disempowered because we are fragmented. Even though our ideals are exactly the same, we all know as Black people what is wrong with this country. We all know as Black people what needs to be done, but we have allowed ourselves to be fragmented by the system. The system has made us, it has polarized us. So I think what is important is, firstly, to try and find a way where we can find each other as Black people, because if we can find each other as Black people, we are a formidable force. Imbumba, Yamanyama, Black power, that is what we're talking about. So we need to resuscitate Amandla Amnyama, because Amandla Amnyama is what is going to deliver the land. Amandla Amnyama is what is going to get rid of this shame that is the current Constitution. Without us attacking the fragmentation of Black people and Blackness, we are not going to achieve any of the things that we want to do. So I think at our starting point is to find each other. It's so important that we find a way to find each other. And I think this very process is one of those things that are so critical to where what I call low-hanging fruits is finding each other. It's going into our communities and doing things that change the lives of our communities. Comrades, I want to say that when we say that Black consciousness is a love word, it's a love of self and it's a love of your community. When you see your own living in squalor, something needs to say to you as an African, my people cannot live like this. I need to do something. So it's for us who are conscious of who we are and the love of our own that should move us into our communities to change the material well-being of our people. And sometimes, and in most cases, that does not require money or power. It requires a willingness and a love of your own people to go in and clean up, to go in and find innovative solutions around the issues of sanitation and access to water. We must act in a loving way by going into our communities and changing the lives of our people. It's not just about finding money. And if it is just money, then we will crowdsource that money from our people who care enough for others and go into communities and change the lives of our people tangibly. We cannot continue philosophizing Black consciousness. Black consciousness is action. So we need to go and act in communities. So that for me is the low-hanging fruit. Go and do something in communities. Ask yourself, what have I done for Black people? Our president, yes, the president says he will hold us accountable. Every 3 months, he will be asking us the question, what have you done for Black people? So ask each one of us who are Black conscious, who've already found this thing of conscious living, needs to do something so that we can show other people Black consciousness in action is what is critical. That's our low-hanging fruit. So talking about Kwanzaa, I think we also have to be very aware that anything black is not celebrated until it makes money for white people. And so we need to be aware of these things and how people commercialize our culture, people commercialize our spirituality outside of ourselves. So in as much as we would like to, and I think we should look at finding similarities with Kwanzaa, and I think we also need to understand what Kwanzaa is about, first fruits. And bearing in mind that in the Northern Hemisphere, this is their spring. We have our own here in South Africa, which happens around the 23rd and 26th of September as the spring solstice, where we now have different festivals that go to Langa in Mpumalanga, where the oldest calendar has been identified, a calendar that is older than the Gregorian calendar. This calendar is in Mpumalanga and in Langa, and we go there to celebrate our first fruits. And I think this is important. So it's important, Kwanzaa is important for people in the Northern Hemisphere because gratitude to nature, to a mother who gives us life, who gives us food, who gives us medicine is absolutely critical. But also, even as we do that, we must be careful that people are not benefiting from our things, because that is correct. These people, it's just normal that they do that. You'd never know of Kwanzaa until a Chinese person is benefiting from it. You'll never know of Kwanzaa until there's a white person, a Jewish person who's benefiting from it. So we must be very, very careful about what we are doing and who benefits when we try and help ourselves and remember who we are and give gratitude to nature and nurse our spiritual beings.
Thank you very much for that education.
Leadership.
No. We speak the truth here, and everybody's perspective of the truth is accepted. We speak everything as we understand it. Deputy President Keketso, thank you very much for making the time for this discussion. And siyabulela kakhulu to the organization. And here is a beautiful comment that is coming through. It says, congratulations on an inspirational session. Lot of work needs to be done. So thank you very much again. We are very grateful. Pon the Politic and the team says, Biko, and then the consciousness movement and the Pan-Africanist Congress must work together in promoting the legacy of Biko and Sobu. Thank you very much, Deputy President. Siyabulela kakhulu. Enkosi.
Enkosi.
Colleagues and friends, thank you very much for making this time for this discussion. It was a very much wonderful discussion. It even went over its time. And I've seen there are two specific comments that have come through at this moment. So I thought I would want to speak to them as my closing remarks, and because they are very important, and we try by all means to flight everything in this discussion. Now, we must resuscitate Black community programs. Umutapo and similar institutions are in place. Let's use them. That's how the low-hanging fruits for both Azapo, PAC, etc. And then Mukoka Refilwe says, Kokeli, Siyabulela, Izwelethu, Africa. Now, there is a question that came from Umfundisi Ufaleni. And I'm taking this question because and it is an important person that we must engage here in this discussion. Now, this question says, I fell in love with the author Chinua Achebe after exploring his questions about freedom in Africa. Here is the question. I quote, is it possible for a Black man to liberate another Black man when that man was oppressed by a white man, close quote. And then he says his answer was no. There's no historical evidence of that. Black people, Black oppressed, that is the last question for you, Thando, from Reverend Fadleni of Umhlobowene. Now, this is my view and this is my perspective of liberation and freedom. What we know from people like Biko and Sobukwe is that as an African people, we are our own liberators. The phenomenon of thinking that a particular person, I'm saying now a particular person because the way that it was written there, it was said black man. So I'm assuming that it is talking about an individual man talking to another man, or whichever way, but I'm looking at it like that. The idea that an individual would be a messiah of liberating another person is problematic for me, and therefore it makes it difficult to achieve a liberation of a people. It is therefore for in my view that one person cannot liberate another person. We are our own liberators. Those people who believe that they are their own liberators as an individual, it becomes problematic. But as a people, as a humanity, we are our own liberators. For us to make sense of what Biko's 75th anniversary is, for us to put Biko and in our ways of doing, promoting his legacy, making the world more human, making aspiring to reach Azania, a human utopia in these borders, which are currently known as South Africa. We need to understand that we are our own liberators, and only when we as a human species, as a people, understand that we do not depend on one man to liberate another, whether that one man was oppressed or was colonized or was taken his liberty by a white man. So we as an African people, we as black people, we must leave this session today understanding that as a legacy of Biko, we are our own liberators. Black men, you are on your own. For you to be liberated, you have to understand that we are our own liberators. Thank you very much for that question, Mfundisi Ofalin. And thank you very much also to everybody who has made the time to watch this discussion. It was a very beautiful discussion. We have seen you, Nkululeko Somhlahlo, of your suggestion that there must be spaces that are open and that are taking place to engage on these issues so that we can reach a wider audience. We appreciate that contribution. Can I ask everybody who is taking part, those who are sharing, those who have made this possible? Wesley Gill, South Africa, thank you very much for making this flight into your platform. And those that are watching in that platform, thank you very much. Please go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We want more followers, which would make it easier for us to expand and engage on these issues that relate to the African people and black people in particular. And to the point, the politics team, a team that is working right across the time and the spectrum. We also thank them for making the time for this program of today. And also, lastly, because we are going to the end of the year, we are going to close and people are going to be engaging on what we call na enjoyment. We are going to be having our last episode tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Pond the Politique will be having its last episode tomorrow, and we will then come back in January. The announcement of that, the date will be announced tomorrow. So everybody who has made the time, everybody who has took the time, use their data to watch with us the special episode of Biko's 75th anniversary. We appreciate it. It's unfortunate that the president of the BLF could not make it. We understand there are many things of today. Thank you very much. All the best. And we love you. And we say, keep on understanding that Biko is our Biko. Biko is us. Us, we are Biko. Happy birthday to Biko, and happy birthday to the spirit that has galvanized us today. Thank you. Sibulela Manyange, Sibulela Amanyango Kamela, Guba Ebesinike, Lomoya Kabiko on these wonderful spaces. And all the best. Thank you very much. Umtungwa, uyengwa umalinge, uti, bye-bye. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.
We see a completely non-racial society. We don't believe, for instance, in the so-called guarantees for minority rights, because guaranteeing minority rights implies the recognition of portions of the community on a race basis. We believe that in our country there shall be no minority, there shall be no majority, there shall just be people. And those people will have the same status before the law, and they will have the same political rights before the law. So in a sense, it will be a completely non-racial egalitarian society.
But will the vast number of blacks, after all their experiences, be able to live a life without giving vent to feelings of revenge, of
yes, we believe it is the duty of the vanguard political movement which brings about change to educate people's outlooks. I mean, in the same way that blacks have never lived in a socialist economic system, they've got to learn to live in one. In the same way that they've always lived in a racially divided society, they've got to learn to live in a non-racial society. They've got many things to learn, and all these must be brought to them and explained to the people by the vanguard movement, which is leading the revolution.